Hi, it's Fred Dinenage. Thank you so much for joining me once again. I'm talking about television, how you get into it, particularly news and current affairs, which is what I know about. Although I've done children's TV and quiz shows, and I've done virtually everything in the last 60 years. So I can tell you how to do it. And I've kind of explained if you want to get to news and current affairs, you can do it on the ITV and BBC training schemes, which are really good. But as I've said, local radio, commercial radio, local newspapers, they're all good things to do. And what I would say more than anything is if you fancy working in TV or radio or broadcasting of any sort at all, just make a nuisance of yourself. Write to them, email them, phone them, say, I want a job, I've been really good. Make an absolute pest of yourself until in the end, with a bit of luck, they're going to get so fed up with hearing from you, they'll invite you in. So don't get disheartened. So there I was, it's the end of 1963. I've got a 7-week contract for 1964, starting on February the 14th, I think, 1964, on a show called Three Go Round, which was going to be a teenage magazine program. It was going to be me, a girl called Britt Allcroft, and another girl called Jane Sinclair. The three of us, it was a kind of forerunner of Blue Peter. It was like a children's magazine program. And Jane Sinclair didn't stay with the show very long. She got married, and I think she married quite a wealthy gentleman and thought she'd go and live in London and have a nice life. Although, strangely enough, I did meet her some years later when Diane Keane was on This Is Your Life. And dear Jane Sinclair, who's still a friend, said to me she'd actually wished she'd stayed with the programme, and that's another story. I mentioned Diane Keane because she replaced Jane Sinclair on Three Go Round. So we got Britt Allcroft, Diane Keane and me. Now, Diane Keane, of course, went on to become a very famous actress. Britt Allcroft, who always fancied being a producer as opposed to being a presenter, managed to get the rights to Thomas the Tank Engine, and she's now, I believe, a multi-millionairess living somewhere exotic. So of the three of us who started on Three Go Round, or those three presenters, you could say you're looking now at the one who didn't quite make it. But there we are. I've enjoyed it anyway. But my first TV appearance was in probably November 1963 on a program called Dad, You're a Square, which was a kind of version of Jukebox Jury, if you remember that show, where you went on there and you reviewed records. They always had 3 young people and 3 older people. The idea being that the young people would say nice things about the pop records because that was the music they enjoyed, and the older people wouldn't like it at all, and it would just be a bit of fun and a bit of an argument between the two sides. And the idea was we'd go on the programme to promote this new programme called Three Go Round, which was starting the following February. My only memory of Dad, You're a Square, my opening TV show, was that the host of the show, a guy called Haig, I think his name was Donald Haig, but I'm not altogether sure. But what amazed me was he appeared to have a bottle of whiskey alongside him, and every time the camera wasn't on him, he'd have a swig of whiskey. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, the following February the 14th, I think it was, we started on Three Go Round. Now, the idea was we went in the day before. I think it was a Wednesday. We went in on the Tuesday and we wrote a few scripts and things and perhaps did a little bit of filming. And then we were to record the first programme, a half-hour programme, on the Wednesday morning. Had to be done by lunchtime on the Wednesday. And there were going to be 7 of those programmes. If it was any good, they might make a few more. If it wasn't any good, that was it. Our careers in TV were over and I'd have to look for another job in newspapers, which I wouldn't have minded. Anyway, on that first morning, we didn't manage to record the whole programme. We managed to do half the programme because we were all very inexperienced. Our studio guest, as I remember, was a guy called Henry Mancini, who was a major Hollywood American composer and orchestra leader. I remember he wasn't particularly friendly towards us, so we were a little bit nervous. Anyway, we never managed to complete the entire programme. We just did half a programme and lunchtime was there. And we thought we'd done quite well. We were actually quite proud of ourselves. And the programme controller, a man called Roy Rich at Southern Television in those days, asked us all to go up to his office. And we thought he was going to say, well done, you're really good, this is a great show. And he lined us up in his office, the 3 presenters, me, Britt Allcroft and Jane Sinclair, and Angus Wright, the young producer, on the end. So the 4 of us stood in a line. And Roy Rich, the programme controller, a very powerful man, walked up and down rather like a sergeant major, and he said to us, "That was the biggest load of effing rubbish I've ever seen in my life. Go away, come back next week with a much better programme, record it all in the morning, otherwise the whole thing will be scrapped and none of you'll ever work in TV again." Well, we were absolutely shocked, completely shocked. We all went away. We went to Angus Wright's house in Southampton, and we started to prepare the next week's programme. We started from scratch and built a completely new programme, came back the next week, and the show was okay. And in fact, that 7-week run, the show ran in fact in the end for 2 or 3 years. I was on it for about 18 months before I moved into news and current affairs, but we'll talk about that on another occasion. And we had some wonderful guests on 3 Go Round. We really did. We had all the pop groups of the time. There was one very embarrassing moment when we had on a singer called Millie, who sang a song called My Boy Lollipop, which was a big hit in 1964, and they stuck her on my lap, which would never happen these days, of course. And I was a shy young man in those days, so I was totally embarrassed. We met all the pop groups of the time, including the Rolling Stones, who almost ended my career because the Rolling Stones were in their infancy then, and they came shambling into the studio. We'd had the Beatles, and they were immaculate. The Rolling Stones came shambling into the studio looking really scruffy. For some reason, they got us all sat on cushions in the studio while I tried to interview them, and they didn't want to know. So I was trying to ask questions, and the Rolling Stones were picking their noses and scratching their feet and their toes and everything and talking amongst themselves. Didn't want to know. And I thought, this is a nightmare. This is the end of my career. And at the end of it all, Brian Jones, who appeared to be the leader of the Rolling Stones at the time and definitely seemed to be the nicest member of the Rolling Stones at the time, in the car park, as he climbed into his Humber Super Snipe, he turned round to me and he said, "Son, I'm sorry about that. I really am," he said, "but that's the way we've been told to behave because the Beatles are the goody two-shoes and we're supposed to be the troublemakers. So sorry about that." And off he went. Brian Jones, who tragically died, of course, in an accident in a swimming pool in Sussex some years later. But that was my introduction to the Rolling Stones, who've lasted actually as long as me, in fact, probably longer. But I mentioned the Beatles, and next time I'll tell you how I met the Beatles and how Ringo Starr, would you believe, asked me for my autograph. Don't believe me? Well, I'll tell you how. See you next time.